Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another episode of Actors, 6 of the Best. Today, one of my favourite female actors of all time, one of the great Hollywood tragedies, Carole Lombard, who sadly died way too early in 1942, because she was in so much hurry to go back to her husband Clark Gable, that instead of taking the train, she took a plane with her mother and never made it back. And Clark Gable was never the same either. But let's not dwell on the morbid. It happened in 1942 and I'm still not over it. So this is where I pick 6 of my favourite, or 6 of the best performances or films. But again, this series is about your choices. This one was actually really difficult because I could have went so many ways. I think I changed my choices about 3 or 4 times. Obviously I have the Carole Lombard Collection 1, which is 3 films, and Carole Lombard Collection 2, which is another 3 films. There's a couple that almost made it from those collections. There's a Criterion that almost made it, that was in it, and then I changed it again. But we're going to start in 1933 with Supernatural. Now, Lombard started as a bathing beauty and was in bathing beauty films. She was in a car accident that left her a little scar on her cheek that you can see in Blu-rays now. And her mother paid for lots of plastic surgery. She's obviously more famous for doing comedy, but there's a couple of different kind of performances in here, and Supernatural is one of those. It's more a lovely little chiller, co-starring Randolph Scott, and it's not a western. It's only 64 minutes long. Remember when films were that short but that effective? She stars as somebody whose brother has recently been murdered, and she goes to a seance, a rather shady seance, and at the same time there's a murderess about to be executed, and the murderess has agreed to leave her body to science. Not sure how much choice she had. And at the same time that the doctor is performing experiments on the murderess, the exact same point, the seance is occurring and Carole Lombard gets possessed by the murderess, and it's a race against time to try and get her unpossessed. It's a wonderful little film. Again, it's only 64 minutes, doesn't need to be any longer. It rattles along at a fair pace, and it's a slightly different side of Lombard. Not too much comedy in this one. And then we go to 1934, Howard Hawks' 20th Century with John Barrymore. One of the almost proto-screwballs. And this turns into a shouting match between Lombard and Barrymore quite often, as Barrymore is a theatre manager or theatre producer who's desperately trying to get Carole Lombard to come back and work with him. Lots of anarchy. Sometimes you could argue a little bit too much anarchy. It's not kind of the polished, final, precise product of the screwball comedy, but it's certainly one of the proto screwballs, if not one of the first screwballs. Lombard is absolutely wonderful. I'm going to say that anyway. And as is Barrymore. This is a wonderful indicator release with lots of fabulous extras. So that's 20th Century, which for a long time wasn't available on Blu-ray. Next we're going to go to a film that I believe isn't available on Blu-ray and should be. A film that I did a random review of some time ago. Hopefully Carole Lombard might release Volume 3 of Carole Lombard. And it's True Confession with Fred McMurray and John Barrymore again. This is just a 6-film DVD set of Lombard. And again, this one is absolutely wonderful. Lombard is a bit of a dreamer. Likes to spin yarns and tell lies, and she gets involved with a murder. She has a nice little tick of sticking her tongue in her cheek whenever she has an idea that gets herself into even more trouble. It's just an absolute blast, and she's just fantastic in it. And McMurray, who I'm not perhaps the biggest fan of, but he's wonderful in it as well. And Barrymore just does Barrymore things. It's just so good. You can check out a random review if you can find it on the channel somewhere. Next we're going to go to 1937 and Nothing Sacred with Frederick March. I mean, some of the early Lombards, her kind of male lead isn't that great, but I mean she did have quite a lot of pretty impressive male leads opposite her in these films. Again, this is about Lombard playing somebody who's perhaps not necessarily economical with truth. She plays somebody who is theoretically dying, so she gets a trip to New York out of it. Frederick March is the reporter who's following her. It was written by Ben Hecht, directed by William Wellman, and again, it's just a lot of fun. Again, this one's only 74 minutes long, doesn't need to be any longer. It's just such a blast. Then we go to 1939, and this again is perhaps a film that shows us what Carole Lombard could have turned into, or the different films that she could have done, because again she's famous for being in funny films, but she could have done anything she wanted basically. This is Made for Each Other with James Stewart, which starts off as not necessarily a screwball comedy, but kind of starts off as a light comedy about a couple, and James Stewart's trying to get a raise at work. They're struggling after they've been married, but then the film does take a darker turn when they have a child, and it takes a kind of tragic turn. So again, it starts off as this kind of light little film, but this shows a different side of Lombard, which again we just wish we could have seen obviously more of in the future, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But it's a really wonderful film, even if you're kind of thrown a little bit by the change in tone. And then you couldn't do this without her last film in 1942, which sadly she never even saw open. Ernst Lubitsch, one of his masterpieces, To Be or Not to Be. This is another one of those films that's in the argument for my favourite film of all time. Lombard is absolutely radiant, hysterical. This is her finest hour and a half. This is peak Lombard, because unfortunately we never saw anything after this. But this is her in absolute perfection, from nuance to line delivery, just absolutely wonderful, with Jack Benny as a group of actors try and fool the Nazis in Poland. It's word perfect. Again, for me, it's one of these films that is literally just about perfect, and Lombard is absolutely perfect in it. So that is my 6 of the best of Carole Lombard. Again, I had actual difficulty because there was like 2 or 3 films that were going to make this. This should have really been 9 of the best, but that would be ridiculous. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments, of course, your favourite 6 Carole Lombard films. It is great that we do have a lot of our films in Blu-ray, and hopefully we get more, even if it is quite upsetting thinking about it. So this is Saoirse Ronan from Saoirse Ronan Films, saying farewell.